I can explain everything. I wasn't even driving the car. Ah! Ah! I just wish everyone would stop hitting me.
Well, once again, I'd like to come in here and apologise for the interference on sound and vision we're experiencing here on Central and indeed Channel 4. It's due to the weather, and I'm afraid it's beyond our control.
David Jason stars as TV's best-loved dad in Sunday's top weekly saga. Enjoy the sunny side of life.
Come on!
In the darling buds of May at 7:45 on Central.
But who is our real mother?
You haven't got a mother or a father.
The Cloning of Joanna May, Sunday super unnatural drama at 9:05 on Central.
No, Harry is brilliant at his job. There's just the little things in life he can't cope with. Jamie, I hope you're not walking mud all over my clean floors.
You know, that's typical men. They can build a space shuttle, but they can hardly design a packet you can open. Oh, Carol!
My last boyfriend,
The computer programmer.
5 A-levels, and he couldn't handle a tin opener.
Girls are more resourceful than boys. I've noticed that in the classroom.
Yeah, well, in marriage, they have to be.
Why is that?
Because we have to look after the men as well as the kids.
Did he really have 5 A-levels?
Yeah, when in woodwork.
Jamie!
Kleenex toilet tissue, one of life's little comforts.
Free only in Today. TV This Week, a day-by-day guide to every programme on TV and satellite for the whole week. TV This Week, free tomorrow, only in Today.
1 or 2,
Mum, do I like mushrooms?
Elbows.
Billy!
Faggots.
Ken?
Oops.
I'm the only one who's got it.
Billy!
Look, Katie, a big ape. Hey, my faggot!
Stop. Who's a big ape?
Billy, you've got 5 seconds.
Mum, this one looks like Uncle Roy.
Get on with your meal.
Mr. Brain's Faggots. A great meal all round.
At Whitegates, we give free valuations, and there are no hidden extras.
That's the way, at Whitegates, that's the way.
World Championship Boxing on Central. Chris Eubank makes his first defence of the WBO super middleweight title. He takes on South African champion Sugar Boy Malinga. The action's all from Birmingham's National Indoor Arena, and it's all on Central. Saturday Sport at 9. World Championship Boxing. In 40 minutes, argument, accusations and controversy in Central Weekend. But first, the national and international news from ITN.
Nations plan new world order of peace and cooperation. Yeltsin says it depends on his reforms succeeding in Russia. Britain and US differ on how fast the West can help. Police ask, was Stephanie's kidnapper also Julie Dart's murderer? And French government want George Habash out of hospital and out of France. Good evening from New York, where the United Nations Security Council met at heads of government level for the first time. Their task, to map out a new world order in the wake of the Cold War, and to establish an enhanced role for the UN itself as peacemaker and protector of human rights. Mr. Major, chairing the meeting, said the uneasy standoff of two nuclear powers was at an end. Ideology no longer drives us apart, no longer do we threaten each other. But even as President Yeltsin took the Soviet Union's old Security Council chair, differences were clear, not least between Britain and the United States, on how far and how fast the West would go in shoring up the new Commonwealth of Independent States. But Mr. Yeltsin told the meeting the future of the globe depended on his reforms succeeding.
It was spectacle, it was symbol, but it was so much more. A global gathering to pledge a new commitment to the UN, for so long derided and paralyzed. A day when a Russian leader could describe to Americans how a joint anti-missile system might work and could do it in a corridor. A day for him to claim the seat of the former Soviet Union. A day whose significance John Major, chairing the meeting, underscored.
Our presence today marks a turning point in the world and at the United Nations. We should send a clear signal that it's through the United Nations and its Security Council that we intend to deal with threats to international peace and security.
The 15 leaders called for a new look at the UN's peacekeeping role, to prevent conflict, not just react to it. President Mitterrand offering French troops for a quick reaction force. Boris Yeltsin spoke of conflict, how the new race to reduce nuclear arms reduced the risk of it, but also how his economic reforms risked igniting it.
I am grateful to the world community for its support of our efforts and for understanding that not only the future of the people of Russia, but also that of the entire planet largely depends on the success of these reforms.
Approval from Mr. Bush. But there is disagreement between Britain and the US on aid to Russia. Britain urging IMF membership within weeks and massive help soon. The US, for now, reluctant. No disagreement, though, on cutting weapons, as Mr. Bush, an eye to Boris Yeltsin, spoke of the need for further cuts.
And tomorrow, in my meeting with President Yeltsin, we will continue the search for common ground on this vitally important issue. He responded with some very serious proposals just the other day.
Another chance, then, for President Yeltsin to reassure the West. For Chinese leader Li Peng, a massacre, and a valuable summit electorally for President Bush and for Mr. Major. The UN's role in global peacekeeping and security may be the summit's long-term and loftier aim. Keeping the peace in Russia by securing its currency is the more pressing issue ahead. Ahead, in a few minutes' time, President Bush meets the Chinese leader at the end of what Mr. Major called, without too much exaggeration, an extraordinary event to match extraordinary times. Bill Neely, News at 10, New York.
In setting itself a comprehensive agenda for reform, the UN nevertheless sidestepped some delicate issues. Should Japan and Germany be permanent members of the Security Council? Have France and Britain had their day? But there remains a bold programme for action, and the Secretary-General has until July to report on how it will be achieved.
It is the change symbolised by Boris Yeltsin's presence here that's made possible this celebration of the New World Order. He came as the leader of the Russian nation, not of a communist superpower, and gave a warm endorsement to the principles that gave birth to the United Nations. Soviet leaders of the past sometimes seem to spend almost as much time walking out of UN meetings as they did walking into them. Andrei Gromyko's protest in 1946 became a symbol of the deep distrust in which the Soviets held the whole UN ideal.
This scene was a starter for continuing drama of Soviet obstruction, which featured the veto.
For most of its history, the United Nations was caught in a Cold War crossfire. The UN was all too often paralyzed by cruel ideological divisions and the struggle to contain Soviet expansion. And today, all that's changed.
But the UN that's been brought back to life by the end of the Cold War has, as an institution, changed little since it was founded. The way power is distributed still reflects the political realities of the world in which it was conceived, when Roosevelt, Churchill and Stalin could meet at Yalta and, as the preeminent world powers, divide the spoils between them. Among those meeting today, some believe a revitalized UN should reflect the way power has shifted. The Japanese point out that they contribute more money than France and Britain combined, and as politely as possible, they're arguing that they have more right to a permanent voice on the Security Council than the old European powers.
And there are other countries that would claim that they would have a right to permanent membership as well. No doubt the third world would get together and say, well, perhaps we should have a nominated member of the Security Council.
Said perhaps it would be
not easy to negotiate, and a distraction at the moment when the UN is changing its role.
And outside the council chamber today, a reminder that however sincere the hopes expressed within, the UN's power to enforce its ideals remains limited. Chinese demonstrators evoked the memory of Tiananmen Square, while the Chinese government delegation solemnly endorsed a declaration that speaks of progress towards human rights and democracy. Making governments stand by pledges like that and using a revitalized part of the point of the whole exercise here. But even among the British team who've come here so full of public enthusiasm, there are grumbles that the old UN ways are proving hard to shake off, that the cumbersome UN mechanism is responding too slowly to change. Edward Sturton, News at 10, New York.
In his address to the Security Council, President Yeltsin paid tribute to the Russian people for their courage. They needed the West's help, he said, in reforming an economy mutilated by ideology and built contrary to all common sense. James Mates reports from Moscow on what that still means for ordinary Russians.
President Yeltsin may be cutting a dash on the world stage, coming out of the shadow of Mikhail Gorbachev, but it takes more than good PR in the West to fill stomachs back home. His public are only really interested in his ability to win foreign aid. The only Western hospitality they're enjoying today is the latest charity handout from the EC stockpiles. The Russian nightly news has dutifully replayed pictures of Yeltsin's trip, but the daily press is less enthusiastic. Pravda's front page this morning was dominated by stories of economic difficulties at home. Are the reforms really helping the people, asks the headline. Their readers will judge the trip a success if it produces Western economic help, such as financial backing to stabilize the value of their currency. While they're not yet carrying rubles around in wheelbarrows, they are seeing the beginnings of hyperinflation.
The government planned that the price rise will be something like 300%. At this very moment, at the very end of January, we have already 620%, and the number of the goods, it's more than 2,000%.
Ironically, McDonald's in Moscow are today having to their price rises. A Big Mac is now so expensive that where once they queued for an hour or more, there now stand deserted metal railings. Yeltsin has allowed prices to rise, but failed to make progress on privatizing businesses. Vasily Korotkov is desperate to become the legal owner of his farm outside Moscow, so he can pick his suppliers and customers. At the moment, he must deal with the state, which can't provide plastic sheeting for his cold frames, so he can grow no vegetables. He hasn't sold a pig for a year because the rubles he gets are virtually worthless. It's no wonder there are neither pork nor vegetables in the shops.
The land here isn't mine, so I can't make the investment that's needed. I can't take risks.
Yeltsin's trying to make the laws of supply and demand work, but there's almost and virtually no supply. The predictable result is economic chaos. He has been praised for his boldness in allowing market forces to dictate prices, but his critics say he must act quickly to get market forces into the rest of the economy as well.
The sort of figure Mr. Yeltsin cuts abroad is no real guide to his success or popularity here in Russia. As Mikhail Gorbachev discovered, being the darling of the Western public means nothing if you can't fill stomachs and fill wallets back home. James Mates, News at 10, Moscow.
For an assessment of what President Yeltsin achieved here, I'm joined from Moscow by Andrei Kortunov, a Russian commentator from the American-Canadian Institute. Mr. Kortunov, Mr. Yeltsin said, unless his reforms endured, the New World Order wouldn't. Do you think he's achieved enough to feel confident tonight?
No, I don't think that he has already achieved enough to feel comfortable. But on the other hand, we should recognize that he still enjoys a high degree of popularity at home.
Do you believe that the Americans are dragging their feet over substantial aid to Russia and Russian membership of the International Monetary Fund?
Well, it's not even the question of international funding or international aid packages, but also the question of the ability of Russia to absorb these aid packages, because there is no infrastructure here in Moscow that would provide fair distribution of the aid program. So I think that some resentment, some prudence is inevitable in this process.
There were some reports from Russia earlier today that the military had issued some dark warnings that if Mr. Yeltsin didn't deliver, they'd consider delivering. How safe is Mr. Yeltsin tonight?
Well, according to the current public opinion polls, he still has a firm support of about 42% of the population, and about 18% of the population oppose Mr. Yeltsin. I think that in reality he has about 2 or 3 months in front of him, because people still have something in their refrigerators. They still hope that there'll be some changes for the better in the near future. If there are no changes within 2 or 3 months, I can foresee a chain reaction starting with a major strike and then involving major political crisis that might ultimately overthrow Mr. Yeltsin.
Mr. Kortunov, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, we hope here in New York to be talking shortly to Mr. Major, but for the time being, it's over to Nicholas Owen in London.
Police hunting the man who kidnapped the estate agent Stephanie Slater say there is a strong possibility that the case is linked with the murder last July of the teenager Julie Dart. An Assistant Chief Constable of the West Yorkshire Force, Tom Cook, is to oversee a joint investigation into both cases.
Tonight, as the main kidnapping inquiry shifted to rural Barnsley, this latest abduction was being linked to the murder of Leeds teenager Julie Dart because of the many similarities. This was the bridge where the £175,000 ransom was dropped off after estate agency manager Kevin Watts was told by telephone to follow a trail of instructions which led him from Birmingham into South Yorkshire.
All I do know is that the courier was in the car, and after he dropped the money on the bridge, he was told to drive that way in the direction of the A628 Manchester Road.
People living nearby said they'd seen several white cards attached to trees with the name of the estate agency where Stephanie Slater worked written on them. It's now been revealed that the money was dropped onto a railway track where the kidnapper was waiting on a motorbike. He's thought to have driven off to a nearby housing estate where police were today carrying out house-to-house inquiries. The scene of the ransom drop is also close to where a hoax bomb was left by the man suspected of murdering Julie Dart last year. As that connection was explored, Julie's grandmother related the two kidnappings.
Whether or not it is the same man, or whoever it is, he must have enjoyed watching that poor girl, what she's gone through, and my daughter and the family who's lost our granddaughter, what we're going through.
Tonight, the links between the two cases was emphasised as an unprecedented meeting took place between two chief constables. The chief constable from West Yorkshire travelled specifically to the West Midlands to meet his counterpart to discuss the similarities between the Julie Dart affair and the latest kidnapping of Stephanie Slater. Meanwhile, Stephanie, who was free to return to her family, is still being debriefed by detectives who hope she will reveal vital clues which will lead them to her kidnapper and maybe solve the murder of Julie Dart. Terry Lloyd, News at 10, Birmingham.
A political storm's erupted in France after a Palestinian leader blamed for many terrorist acts was allowed in for medical treatment. There are calls for ministers to resign in the row over George Habash. A report next. Plus, a video shows Iraqi brutality against captured rebels. And in Ulster, 2 Royal Marines to be charged with the killing of a man shot in the back. That's in a couple of minutes.
The world is just one giant package, full of millions of little packages. Get an eye full of these. All looking for somewhere to go.
Sydney, not you, the place.
Now, when you have a desperately important parcel, no matter how big or how small, you'd better shape up, honey, by calling DHL. Ain't no mountain high enough.
DHL. You know it's arrived the moment it's sent. Cripes, that was quick.
You're welcome, Sydney.
This is callback in action. It takes all your calls when you're not available. It then calls them back to you when you are. You don't miss a thing. Not an appointment, not an order, not a job. To have your calls chase you, call 0800 21 4000. You need never miss a call again.
We've just added a downstairs loo.
How? With Saniflu. Saniflu? Yes, and it was so quick and easy to install. Economical, too. In fact, we could have installed it almost anywhere. Anywhere? Oh, it's easy. Just ask your plumber.
The new Nissan Sunny GTI, now all over the country.
And on, 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 and Ariston, and on, 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 and Ariston, and on, and on, and on, and Ariston.
Every 7 seconds, somebody somewhere opens an insurance policy with Eagle Star. Eagle Star covers your world.
The French government is embroiled in a major row after allowing a man alleged to be one of the world's most wanted terrorists into the country for medical treatment. There are reports tonight that he may be flown out of France again in a few hours' time. George Habash, the leader of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, arrived in Paris on Wednesday after apparently suffering a stroke. In hospital, he refused to answer questions.
The man whose arrival in France has thrown the government into turmoil was tonight under armed guard at a Red Cross hospital in Paris. CRS anti-terrorist forces were drafted in as doctors decided whether he was fit for questioning. George Habash, leader of a militant Palestinian faction, was flown to France on a special Red Cross flight from Tunisia after reportedly suffering a stroke. A French television crew were tipped off about his arrival, but neither President Mitterrand, who was visiting Oman, nor any of his ministers claimed to have been informed. 2 top officials at the French Foreign Ministry have resigned, and the leader of the French Red Cross, Georgina Dufoy, is standing down as a presidential advisor. But today, a Foreign Ministry spokesman defended the decision to admit Habash.
The only question that the ministry had to answer was, do we refuse medical assistance and hospitalization? And you know that on humanitarian grounds, this has never been done in the past.
George Habash has been linked to numerous terrorist attacks, including the destruction of 3 passenger jets in the Jordanian desert in 1970, the killing of 27 people in a machine gun attack on Ben Gurion Airport in 1972, and the 1976 hijack of an Air France jet to Entebbe. French opposition politicians say ministers should have resigned.
The French government did a very big mistake in welcoming Mr. Habash in France.
What do you think should happen now?
I think that the politics responsible of this decision would resign if they have a sense of democracy.
Having entered this hospital as a patient, Mr. Habash is now being guarded like a prisoner. Whatever his fate, there's no doubt his arrival in France was a major blunder for which the French government is already paying a heavy political price. Libby Wiener, News at 10, Paris.
A video showing top Iraqi officials, including Saddam Hussein's cousin, beating prisoners and threatening them with torture, has been smuggled out to the West. It was shot by the Iraqi army during the suppression of the Shiite Muslim rebellion in southern Iraq after the Gulf War. Some of the pictures in this report are distressing.
The Iraqi army made this video at the time when it was brutally repressing the rebellions after the Gulf War and slaughtering Shiite captives. Iraqi exiles say this is General Hassan Ali al-Majid, a cousin of Saddam Hussein and now the defense minister, leading and orchestrating the kicking and beating of prisoners. Also filmed was Mohammad Hamza al-Zubaydi, who was later promoted to prime minister. In 1988, al-Majid ordered the murder of thousands of Kurds. Where did they escape to, your friends? This man was asked. Answer me or I'll kill you. They pointed a pistol at this man's head to make him talk. It's not known whether he was killed in the end. Thousands were slaughtered, and this video was used to encourage other soldiers to be equally ruthless. Later, the generals were filmed discussing the extermination of Shiite tribes. The brutality of these scenes was no surprise to Amnesty International.
Saddam Hussein and his troops have been doing this sort of thing for a decade. Why should we think that they've stopped whenever they crushed a rebellion? Amnesty International thinks this kind of behaviour will not cease until the United Nations is allowed in to monitor the human rights situation.
The UN has said sanctions against Iraq won't be lifted while such practices continue.
A Gallup poll for tomorrow's Daily Telegraph suggests Labour have edged ahead of the Conservatives. It puts Labour support at 39.5%, up 1.5 points on last week. The Tories are on 38, down 2, and the Liberal Democrats on 17.5, up 1 point.
Neil Kinnock was today selling Labour as the party of the bottom 91%. It was the latest shot in the war of words over taxes. His plans, he said, would hurt fewer than 1 in 10 families, while nearly half Britain's households would be better off. And he told an audience of prospective parliamentary candidates in Manchester that people wouldn't be bribed by the penny in the pound tax cut it suggested may precede the election.
The British people know that if any resources are available, any resources can be garnered by the government, then they must, for the sake of the country, be used to improve the services like education and health. Now then, Jennifer is going to show me.
Mr. Kinnock used a local primary school for the visual focus of this latest round of campaigning. It's a scene that's likely to be repeated frequently in the weeks ahead. In a close race, every photo opportunity will count. Tim Hewitt, News at 10, Manchester.
More job losses were announced today. 800 are to go at the electrical retailers Rumbelows, mainly through compulsory redundancies. The company, owned by Thorn EMI, suffered a £16 million loss last year. British Coal is closing Bickershaw Colliery in Lancashire with a loss of 600 jobs. It says the pit's been losing money for 6 years. And 90 jobs are to go at Granada Television's bases in London, Liverpool and Manchester. The company blames the recession and the impact of the ITV franchises battle. Now, we return to New York and Alistair Stewart, who is with the Prime Minister.
Thank you indeed, Nicholas. Prime Minister, we talked earlier on about the urgency to help Boris Yeltsin. What is your assessment of what he leaves with tonight?
I think he'll be very satisfied with the outcome. What we've seen in the United Nations is a remit for the United Nations to move forward from its present position. That's what everyone in the Security Council wished to see. We've achieved it, and I think everyone would be very pleased about that.
Are you satisfied on reflection as well with your talks with the United States? You've made it clear that you want urgent action on Russia's membership of the IMF, substantial help for them. Have you got the Americans on board?
No, I'm entirely satisfied with my discussions with President Bush last night. We discussed the desirability of Russia becoming members of the International Monetary Fund. We would both like to see that happen as speedily as possible. That is the first essential step.
You also announced in your speech just now that you're going to impose new restrictions on the movement and export of chemical and biological products. Is there pressure now on you as well on broader disarmament to make some initiative on nuclear disarmament?
No, I don't believe there is. We made very substantial reductions in sub-strategic nuclear weapons last year. In fact, we halved our sub-strategic armoury, and we also made changes in conventional armaments. Trident is a basic minimum necessary nuclear deterrent for this country, we will keep it. And it is quite disproportionate, the scale of nuclear armaments that Russia will have even after their disarmament process is fully completed.
The cynics said this was just a glorious international photo call. What do you believe it's achieved in substance?
I believe it's achieved a great deal, and if it were just as you describe it, I doubt that the heads of 15 countries of the world would have come here for that. They've actually come here because they want to move the United Nations forward. They want to reaffirm the importance of a chemical weapons convention, of better non-proliferation, of improving disarmament. That's what they came here for. That's what we've achieved. The United Nations and everyone at the Security Council believes it was a very successful day.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for coming out and talking to us.
Thank you very much.
From New York, back to Nicholas in the studio in London.
2 Royal Marines are to be